We have for some few frantic centuries tortured ourselves to save mankind. It will then be time enough to discuss whether they can possibly be saved. When, in the case of infant mortality, for example, we have exhausted ourselves with the earth-shaking efforts required to save the life of every individual baby, it will then be time enough to consider whether every individual baby would not have been happier dead. We are to remove mountains and bring the millennium, because then we have a quiet moment to discuss whether the millennium is at all desirable. Here we have the low water mark of the impotence of the sad reformer, and here we have the reason of the paradoxical triumph of the happy one. His triumph is a religious triumph. It rests upon the perpetual assertion of the value of the human soul and of human daily life. It rests upon his assertion that human life is enjoyable because it is human, and he will never admit, like so many compassionate pessimists, that human life ever ceases to be human. He does not merely pity the lowness of men, he feels an insult to their elevation. Brute pity should be given only to brutes. Cruelty to animals is cruelty and a vile thing, but cruelty to a man is not cruelty, it is treason. Tyranny over a man is not tyranny, it is rebellion, for man is royal. Now, the practical weakness of the vast mass of modern pity for the poor and the oppressed is precisely that it is merely pity. The pity is pitiful, but not respectful. Men feel that the cruelty to the poor is a kind of cruelty to animals. They never feel that it is justice to equals, nay, it is treachery to comrades. This dark scientific pity, this brutal pity, has an element in sincerity of its own, but it is entirely useless for all ends of social reform. Democracy swept Europe with a saber when it was founded upon the rights of man. It has done literally nothing at all since it has been founded only upon the wrongs of man. Or, more strictly speaking, its recent failure has been due to its not admitting the existence of any rights or wrongs, or indeed of any humanity. Evolution, the sinister minister of revolution, does not especially deny the existence of God. What it does deny is the existence of man, and all the despair about the poor and the cold and repugnant pity for them. It has largely due to the vague sense that they have literally relapsed into the state of the lower animals. A writer sufficiently typical of recent revolutionism, Gorky, has called one of his books by the eerie and effective title, Creatures That Once Were Man. That title explains the whole failure of the Russian Revolution, and the reason why the English writers, such as Dickens, did with all their limitations achieve so many of the actual things at which they aimed, was that they could not possibly have put such a title upon a human book. Dickens really helped the unfortunate in the matters to which he set himself, and the reason is that across all his books and sketches about the unfortunate might be written the common title, Creatures That Still Are Men. There does exist, then, this strange optimistic reformer, the man whose work begins with approval and ends with earthquake. Jesus Christ was destined to found a faith which made the rich poorer and the poor rich, but even when he was going to enrich them, he began with the phrase, "Blessed are the poor." The Gissings and the Gorkys say, as a universal literary motto, "Cursed are the poor." Among a million who have faintly followed Christ in this divine contradiction, Dickens stands out especially. He said in all his reforming utterances, "Cure poverty," but he said in all his actual descriptions, "Blessed are the poor." He described their happiness, and men rushed to remove their sorrow. He described them as human, and men resented the insults to their humanity. It is not difficult to see why, as I said at an earlier stage of this book, Dickens's denunciations have had so much more practical an effect than the denunciations of such a man as Gissing. Both agreed that the souls of the people were in a kind of prison, but Gissing said that the prison was full of dead souls. Dickens said that the prison was full of living souls, and the fiery cavalcade of rescuers felt that they had not come too late. Of this general fact about Dickens's descriptions of poverty, there will not, I suppose, be any serious dispute. The dispute will only be about the truth of these descriptions. It is clear that whereas Gissing would say, "See how their poverty depresses the Smiths or the Browns," Dickens says, "See how little, after all, their poverty can depress the Cratchits." No one will deny that he made a special feature of the poor. We will come to the discussion of the veracity of these scenes in a moment. It is here sufficient to register in conclusion of our examination of the reforming optimist that Dickens certainly was such an optimist, and that he made it his business to insist upon what happiness there is in the lives of the unhappy. His poor man is always a Mark Tapley, a man the optimism of whose spirit increases, if anything, with the pessimism of his experience. It can also be registered as a fact equally solid and quite equally demonstrable that this optimistic Dickens did effect great reforms. The reforms in which Dickens was instrumental were indeed, from the point of view of our sweeping social panaceas, special and limited. But perhaps for that reason especially they afford a compact and concrete instance of the psychological paradox of which we speak. Dickens did definitely destroy, or at the very least help to destroy, certain institutions. He destroyed those institutions simply by describing them. But the crux and peculiarity of the whole matter is this, that, in a sense, it can really be said that he described these things too optimistically, and in a real sense he described Dotheboys Hall as a better place than it is. In a real sense he made out the workhouse as a pleasanter place than it can ever be. For the chief glory of Dickens is that he made these places interesting, and the chief infamy of England is that it has made these places dull. Dullness was the thing that Dickens' genius could never succeed in describing. His vitality was so violent that he could not introduce into his books the genuine impression even of a moment of monotony. If there is anywhere in his novels an instant of silence, we only hear more clearly the hero whispering with the heroine, the villain sharpening his dagger, or the creaking of the machinery that is to give out the god from the machine. He could splendidly describe gloomy places, but he could not describe dreary places. He could describe miserable marriages, but not monotonous marriages. It must have been genuinely entertaining to be married to Mr. Quilp. This sense of a still incessant excitement he spreads over every inch of his story and over every dark track of his landscape. His idea of a desolate place is a place where anything can happen. He has no idea of that desolate place where nothing can happen. This is a good thing for his soul, for the place where nothing can happen is hell. but still